we have to play this very key move, e4. Nice. Hey guys, this is Andy from Noctie, and today we're gonna go through the weekly scenario for week 28 of 2025. Let's take a look at this week's position. This week's scenario looks like this. It comes from a game between the two grandmasters Jorden van Foreest playing as white against Boris Gelfand as black. We have reached a very interesting minor piece endgame where black is temporarily up a pawn. So in these types of minor piece endgames, a general rule of thumb is that the side holding the bishop is usually favored when there is play on both sides of the board, as in this case. So why is it that it is white who is playing for a win here? Well, it's mainly because of the dominant knight here on c5. And as we can see, from c5, the knight is eyeing multiple of black's pawns. And the first thing that we should notice when we look at this position is that it actually forks the e6 and b7 pawns. And both of these pawns are on light squares, so they are on the opposite color of our bishop, meaning that we can't defend both of them, so one of them is bound to fall. So after that, material balance will be restored, and white will try to mobilize the queenside pawn majority and try creating a passed pawn. So for this reason, white is the one in the driver's seat and black should be fighting for a draw. But with that said, white's advantage is still very tiny, and this is by no means a forced win. So now we're going to take a look at how the game went. And what's interesting is that white actually managed to convert this into a win, which shows how difficult it can be in practice to defend these inferior endgames. But that only gives us more reasons to study them and practice them. So let's see here what Gelfand played. So as we saw, white is attacking our pawns and we can't defend them. So what we should think about here is what is the best way to give up one of these pawns. And Gelfand here tried for bishop e7. And the idea is that, well, if one of the pawns is bound to fall anyways, why not activate the bishop using that tempi? And now white has a choice. So as we saw, we could either take the b7 pawn or the e6 pawn. So here, if you want, you can pause for a second and just think which pawn should be better to grab. And yeah, did you say the b pawn? Nice, very good. So here, Jorden went ahead and took the b pawn. So why is it better? Well, for two reasons. And one of them is that the e6 pawn here is a double pawn anyways. So grabbing it won't make a big difference. And the other reason is of course that when we grab the b7 pawn, it will be much easier for white to mobilize the queenside pawn majority. And it will be thus easier to create a passed pawn. So white has taken our b7 pawn, and here we have material balance once again, both sides holding 5 pawns. And here Gelfand plays a natural move, king f7, activating the king and trying to get it to the queen side. Alright, white does the same, activating their king. And now Gelfand plays an interesting move, but that turns out to be a bad decision. So here he plays g5, and the idea is that it opens up the g6 square, enabling the king to walk over and grab the h6 pawn. But the problem here is that it is too slow. White will be much faster mobilizing their own pawns on the queen side. So here white goes knight c5, jumping back to the square that it came from. And from there, it attacks our a6 pawn. And as we saw, the a6 pawn is on a light square, so black cannot really defend it. But here, black has an interesting decision to make, because here, when white plays knight c5, they are offering an exchange of the minor pieces. So here, black can choose to capture the knight and transition into a pawn endgame. So here, we should pause for a second and see if that pawn endgame is holdable, if it's defendable, so to speak. And yeah, here also, if you want, you can pause the video and try to visualize how that position looks like and what's your judgment on the evaluation. But in this case, it turns out that grabbing it will be very bad, because doing so, white will of course take it back with the pawn, and from there, white's king can infiltrate into black's position using these two light squares. And with the pawn majority on the queen side and black's king infiltrating, that pawn endgame will be impossible to defend. So here Gelfand played the only move that attempts to keep this together, and that is a5. And that is actually a nice move, because black's bishop is hitting the knight, so white cannot grab a pawn, and this is the only way of saving the pawn and keeps the game alive. So Jorden moves the knight, and now white is preparing to take the a-pawn, of course, and also there's a threat here on the e5 pawn with check. So here black took the chance to swap the a-pawn, and here black takes with the knight. And once again, it is a bad idea for black to swap off the minor pieces, because after doing so, white will have a passed pawn here that black's king must run to catch up with. And when black is doing that, white's king can in turn infiltrate here on the king side. So black didn't go for that. Instead, black plays bishop f8. And this looks like a nice move, because the h6 pawn is undefendable. But here, white finds a beautiful trick, so to speak. The pawn cannot be defended right away, but white plays here king g4. And the idea is that when black takes the pawn, white can go forwards with king h5, hitting the bishop. And when the bishop moves, the pawn becomes unguarded, and now white can take it back. So here we have still material balance. Both sides have 3 pawns each and a minor piece. But here it becomes clear that white is much better and probably even winning here, because white here has 2 passed pawns on the queen side. They are connected, whilst black has only 1 passed pawn here on the king side. And here we see the weakness of the double pawns here on the e-file. They are stuck and they have nowhere to go. So here black tries for a desperate move, e4, and the idea is that if black doesn't play e4, white will play e4 himself and completely shutting down black's position. But after black plays e4, white can simply go after the pawn, and it is undefendable. Here black tries giving a check, and now white can simply grab the pawn. So suddenly white is up a pawn, and black tries to run with the h-pawn, try to create some counterplay. So here white simply brings back the knight to d3, and from there it can choose to jump to f2 if necessary, and from there it will control the 2 key squares of h1 and h3, both stopping the h-pawn from promoting. Here black tries to push it forwards anyways, because what choice does he have? And here white chose to move the knight to f4, which is actually even better because it's more active. And once again, black cannot swap off the minor pieces, because if doing that, white can simply take back with the king, and white's king will be in time to grab black's h-pawn, but the 2 passed pawns here on the queen side will be difficult for black to stop. So black simply goes forwards with the king instead. And now white brings the king to f3. So here white plays very safe, always in control. And that is actually a good tip when converting winning endgame, because here white is obviously winning, and it's a very good idea just to take it slowly and make sure to eliminate all kinds of counterplay from the opponent. So here black tries to move forwards with the king, but there's no way to go, because white's king here is controlling these 2 important light squares. And notice here also that since black has a dark squared bishop, these light squares are basically off limits for black. And now white can start pushing the queenside majority. Black shuffles around a bit, and now white can just keep pushing. Black goes to d8 to stop the pawn from going to b6, and now white can just march forwards with the other pawn. Black tries to bring in the king, and here white plays c5, and here black actually resigned, because in the next move white will play b6, and from there it will go to b7, which is a light square. And yeah, the white king will take the h-pawn anytime, and then black will be simply losing. So here Gelfand chose to resign. So this is a very interesting example, and it demonstrates how white actually managed to win by converting this very tiny advantage in this endgame. And this also shows how difficult it can be in practice to defend these inferior endgames. And not the least psychologically, it's very hard to keep on finding the accurate moves needed to hold these kind of positions. So now we've looked at how the game actually went, but before we move on and play against Noctie, let's take a look at how a better defense might look like. Alright, so here we are at the starting position again, and now let's take a look at how an alternative defense might look like. And before we start, just a quick disclaimer. I just want to emphasize that I am in no position to judge the play of these two grandmasters. I am merely an amateur chess enthusiast. And the line that I found here is, of course, with the aid of the computer. So take this only as my perspective on this position, and this line that I found using the computer is only one line that makes sense to me intuitively at my level. So yeah, let's take a look at this. And as we saw, the first question that black should be considering here is, of course, both the b7 and e6 pawns are attacked, and we cannot defend both, so we have to make a decision. Which one should we sacrifice and which one should we try to keep? And of course here, we can choose to defend the e6 pawn, for example, if we go to f7 with the king. But the b7 pawn is a bit trickier to defend. A different approach of defense is going b6. So by going b6, we are also forcing white to make a decision. Now, white has to choose, grab the e6 pawn or the a6 pawn. And as we saw, the most logical capture is to take the a6 pawn. And that is because, yeah, the e6 pawn is a double pawn. And by grabbing the a6 pawn, white will have a 3 versus 1 majority on the queen side instead of 3 versus 2, which will make it easier for white to create a passed pawn. But here, white can also grab the e6 pawn. That will also be a valid attempt in pressuring black. So both of these are actually fine choices for white. No one is like much better than the other one. But here, let's take a look at what happens if white plays knight takes a6. So from here, black has to play a very critical move. And this move is extremely hard to find for a human. I, of course, found it using the computer as help. But after I found it and looking back at it, it actually makes very much sense. And remember in the game how Gelfand played this move in a later stage. Here we can take that idea and play it right away. So what is the move, you could perhaps be wondering. So here, if you want a challenge, please pause the video and see what is black's best move. So here, black should actually play e4. This is the best attempt for defending this position. And in the game, we saw that Gelfand play this much later. And when he played it, it was actually too late. But playing it now makes a huge difference, because when we go e4, so first of all, we stop white from playing e4 himself. And after we play e4, we control these two key light squares, f3 and d3, making it harder for white's king to infiltrate. And the idea is that the time it takes for white to reorganize the king, we can ourselves bring in our king and help out in the defense. And here, it's a natural move for white to play c4 and try to push forwards with the queenside majority as soon as they can and create passed pawns. And here we can bring in our king to f7, and now white plays c5. Going forwards, very natural move, and forcing a creation of a passed pawn. So here we simply exchange, and white has a choice. We can either take with the pawn or the knight. Both make sense. Taking with the pawn is of course good because then they are undoubling their pawns and they will have a connected passed pawn. But on the other hand, taking with the knight, as we'll look at here, also attacks the e4 pawn. And as we saw here, the problem for black is that the pawns on the light squares are very hard to defend. So by taking with the knight, the pawn e4 is actually under attack and it can't be defended. So we're just going to look at how it might go on from here. White takes with the knight, attacking our e4 pawn. It cannot be saved, or at least not directly. But here, black has a very nice trick, and that is to play bishop e7. So here we're actually protecting the pawn indirectly because we are skewering the pawn here on b4. And here's an example. If white decides to take the e4 pawn, we can simply take the b4 pawn. And now this should be an easy position to hold because here black's bishop is active, and also here the h6 pawn is weak. So if white is not careful, it could instead be black who is pressing for a win. Alright, so this was another approach, and I think this is a bit more intuitive and easier to play in practice. And now we're gonna put it up to test and play it against Noctie. Let's see how it goes. Alright, now it's our turn to play against Noctie, and the mission here is to survive for 30 moves. And of course, when surviving these 30 moves, we want to also end up with a position that is either equal or defendable. So even though the system won't be able to monitor the evaluation of the end position, it will be up to us to internally check that off if we manage to do that or not. So here, based on our analysis, I'm going to go forwards and play b6. Let's see what Noctie does. Okay, she immediately goes for the a6 pawn. And here, just as we analyzed, we have to play this very key move, e4. Nice. It's good to see that it's marked as a pink move. And remember, a pink move is an excellent move. So it's very nice here to see that Noctie is agreeing with our idea. Okay, Noctie goes c4, very natural move, mobilizing the queenside majority and trying to create a passed pawn. Here we simply bring in our king. Should be quite logical. Okay, white pushes forwards, and here I would like to swap off a pair of pawns. Okay, interesting. Noctie marks this as a mistake. Let's see why. Why is that a mistake? Okay, white grabs it. But now I'm thinking of moving in with our king because we want to bring in our king to be able to help out in the defense. Okay, makes sense. Noctie marches with the b pawn, but now we just bring in our king closer. And soon it feels like our king will be able to stop these two passed pawns. Let's bring our king to the c8 square, furthermore to the queen side, because we want to try stop these two passed pawns. This looks a bit tricky. If we move our bishop somewhere on this diagonal, then b6 will come, so that is not good. And moving the pawns feels bad. Let's see if we go with the pawn to this square. Yeah, or we could do that, but generally in endgames we should avoid moving pawns if we don't have a very clear purpose, because remember, pawns don't go backwards. So if we just want to play a move for playing a move's sake, then we should try moving a piece, because who knows, down the line it might turn out that the pawn move actually weakens something. So with that said, we cannot move the bishop here, and we don't want to move a pawn. Our king is stuck, so we're going to move the bishop to either b6 or a5. And here b6 looks more natural because from there we are blocking the b pawn. Let's go with that. Nice. Oh yeah, Noctie changed her mind. So sometimes this happens when Noctie changes her judgment, and that is because first she judges with her intuition that tries to emulate a human intuition. So based on that intuition, Noctie gives us a great move, but then she also uses some calculation like a stockfish evaluation, and that evaluation lowers the quality of the move. So okay, white goes there, but here the beautiful thing is that our pawns is actually limiting white's knight. So white don't have a entry point. So let's just move up with the king, because white cannot make progress with the knight, or at least it won't be easy. Then she'll have to try for some maneuver. Okay, she goes back. Yeah, we are happily also moving back because we are defending here and we are very happy to just repeat. Okay, we're gonna go back. Let's see if Noctie tries to be ambitious and find a different way. Okay, here it seems that Noctie taps out, and yeah, it might just be the case that we got ourselves out of this tricky situation. Let's just stop and visualize what would happen if Noctie tries to go for a maneuver with knight c2 from c2 to d4. But I think we can just place our king here on d6 and the knight still cannot make progress. And yeah, white's king can also not move too far because our g-pawn here is on the move. So yeah, let's go to c8, and then we have a threefold repetition. So here we actually managed to hold this. So yeah, that was it. Very happy to have survived this. So when we have completed this, now is actually a very good idea to just reload the position and increase the difficulty of Noctie to the maximum and try to defend this. And here, when we are playing super GM level, we are really under pressure, and yeah, here we can simply challenge ourselves and see if this same defense will work. So feel free to try that out for yourself, and remember, these weekly scenarios are designed to be suitable for players at all levels. So no matter if you're a super GM, as we saw in the game, this position is still very difficult to defend. And on the other hand, if you are just a beginner, it is still a very good practice, because defending inferior endgames is important for chess players at all levels. Alright, so yeah, as you see, it is starting to get dark outside, so that's why the lighting is a bit different. And that is because it took a few attempts from me to get this right. And yeah, this was a very challenging position, and I think it's very important to once in a while mix in your training to try to defend some of these inferior positions, because often when we are practicing, it is more fun to practice tactics or mating attacks. But oftentimes it's actually these defensive skills that are even more important, because for players at all levels, it happens all the time that we get in inferior positions. And from there, it is actually a very, very important asset to be able to keep your cool and continue finding accurate moves, because one of the biggest leaks in chess players is actually when we starting to get inferior and we lose our focus and starting to play even worse moves. So many losses that we experience are actually unnecessary. So yeah, feel free to revisit this weekly scenario as many times as you want. And as we saw, if you complete it at your given level, feel free just to crank the difficulty up and really feel the pressure against a strong opponent when we are in an inferior endgame. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and as always, happy playing. Bye bye.